ago, the United Nations was born. Today, as we gather to celebrate this milestone, we are not just looking back on history. We are standing in the very future that our founders once dreamed of.
If these walls could talk, if Africa whole could speak, it would whisper stories that shaped our world. Stories of leaders who dared to dream of unity. Stories of nations healing from war and wounds. Stories of a world learning again and again that peace is fragile, but worth everything. 8 years ago, the world came together, broken, bruised, but unbent. Out of the ash of conflict, the United Nations was born. Collective promise that humanity would never again walk the road of destruction alone. And from the very beginning, Ethiopia was there, not just as a participant, but as a pioneer. When the world needed a symbol of independence, Ethiopia stood tall. When Africa sought a voice, Ethiopia gave it a platform. And when unity needed a home, Africa Whole was built, right here in Addis Ababa. Today, the world returned to those same walls to celebrate 80 years of shared history, shared struggle, and shared hope. The United Nations 80th anniversary was not just a milestone. It was a moment of reflection, a moment to ask, where have we been, where are we now, and where are we going together? As the United Nations flag rose in the morning light and the anthem filled the hall, you could feel the gravity of the moment. Standing together were the Secretary General of the United Nations, the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, the Chairperson of the African Union Commission, and the State Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ethiopia. Leaders not divided by borders, but united by purpose. Because here in Africa Hall, history and humanity have always met in the same room. Then came a voice that carried decades of service and pride, Mr. Molla Sharo, president of the former International Civil Servants Association. He opened the ceremony not with politics, but with gratitude. He praised the United Nations' 8 decades of dedication to peace, to crisis response, to the idea that cooperation still works. And he reminded the world that Ethiopia has contributed more than words. It has contributed people. The nation holds the highest number of retired United Nations staff in Africa, a quiet but powerful reminder of how deeply Ethiopia's fingerprints are woven into the United Nations legacy. From peacekeeping mission in distant lands to humanitarian operations in crisis zones to climate dialogues and development efforts, Ethiopians have carried the United Nations ideals on their shoulders. Because to serve the world for Ethiopia is not just an act of diplomacy, it's an act of identity.
Moment to honor the legacy of our collective service. We, the retirees, remain and will always remain an integral part of the United Nations, the UN family. Serving under the UN system was both a privilege and a responsibility. It afforded us fair pension, comprehensive health coverage, opportunities for professional growth, and above all, the honor of serving humanity with dignity and purpose.
Then Ambassador Mahmoud Ali Yusuf, Africa's longest-serving diplomat and chairperson of the African Union Commission, spoke with honesty and heart. He reminded everyone that the world remains torn by conflict of interest, by inequality, by the silence of forgotten voices. But he also reminded us of something powerful, that the relevance of multilateralism cannot be understated. The African Union, the United Nations, the European Union, and the Arab League are not competitors, but companions on the same road. Together, they hold the blueprint for a shared future. Africa's Agenda 2063 and the World Sustainable Development Goals for 2030, 2 timelines, 1 destiny, called it vibrant multilateralism, a belief that every region, every nation, every community has a place at the table of global progress. Because in a connected world, no one can rise alone.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are all aware of the scarcity of financial resources for our organizations. We are also confronted with the shrinking space of freedom and democracy across the world. the international community is somehow crippled by conflict of interest. The growing gap between global influential actors reflects on the poor performance of our organizations. However, no one should question the relevance of the multilateral system represented by the United Nations, the African Union, the European Union, the Arab League, and many other organizations.
Ethiopia's State Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Birhanu Tsaggaye, spoke next, and his words struck a chord. He reminded the world that no nation is free from crisis. But when crisis comes, the United Nations remains a trusted partner. He celebrated the United Nations alignment with Ethiopia's national priorities and called for a new chapter, one where the United Nations decentralizes its power, empowers its local presence, and ensures that decision-making flows not only from headquarters, but from the heart of the nations it serves. Because global cooperation must begin at the local level, in communities, in homes, in the hearts of people.
After 8 decades of trials, achievement, and the setback, the UN stands to be the only organization with universal membership and organizing principles. Ethiopia attaches the profound importance to its status as a founding member of the United Nations and the continuing role we play in support of the UN Charter Center multilateral systems.
Then came Mr. Claver Gatiti, the United Nations Under Secretary General and Executive Secretary General of the United Nations for the Economic Commission of Africa. He looked around the hall, this sacred space where the African Union was born, and called it what it truly is the birthplace of African unity. He praised Ethiopia for its unwavering hospitality, for its courage in peacekeeping, for its compassion in humanitarian action, and for its leadership in tackling climate change. He called Ethiopia not just a host, but a home of the United Nations in Africa. And as his words echoed, you could feel it, a sense of pride that was not about titles or power, but about belonging.
And the proud seat of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa for more than 60 decades. It was here in this very hall that the Organization of African Unity was born. Moment that ignited Africa's journey towards freedom and unity, and whose spirit lives on today in the African Union and our shared pursuit of the Africa we want under the Agenda 2063.
Then from the silence came music and movement. Students from Anderlecht International School took the stage, their songs and performance carrying the voice of a new generation. Their laughter, their confidence, their hope, they were the real message of the day, because the next 8 years of the United Nations belong to them. As the ceremony continued, a panel discussion, leaders, diplomats, and thinkers reflected on what the United Nations must become. Not just what it has achieved, but what it still must do to remain relevant, to remain human, and to remain united. The United Nations of yesterday was born in the ash of war. It built peace where none seemed possible. It gave humanity a platform to speak, even when it disagreed. The United Nations of today stands in a world of new storms, climate change, inequality, conflict, and displacement. Yet it stands because people still believe in its purpose, and the United Nations of tomorrow must be more inclusive, more localized, and more courageous. It must listen to the voices from the global south. It must learn from nations like Ethiopia, nations that have lived through struggle and still chose peace. Because Ethiopia is not just a place on the map, it's a mirror of humanity's resilience. From its ancient civilization to its modern vision, Ethiopia has stood for independence, for faith, and for unity. And that is what United Nations stands for too. So today, as the United Nations turns 80 and Ethiopia continues to rise, we are reminded that the world's greatest strength has always been togetherness. This was not just a celebration, it was a renewal a renewal of faith in humanity, in hope, in us, because in a world of walls, Ethiopia and the United Nations will always build bridges. The story of the United Nations is the story of us all. And right here, in the heart of Africa, its heartbeat continues. This is Fikra Maria Masafa from Abyssinia Business Network.